Deck the halls with a demon. A cozy paranormal holiday rom-com full of magic and mischief. By Wynne Valentine. First edition published by I2I Hype, LLC, 2024. Copyright 2024 by Wynne Valentine. All rights reserved. No part of this publication may be reproduced, stored, or transmitted in any form by any means, electronic, mechanical, photocopying, recording, scanning, or otherwise, without written permission from the publisher. It is illegal to copy this book, post it to a website, or distribute it by any other means without permission. This novel is entirely a work of fiction. The names, characters, and incidents portrayed in it are the work of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, events, or localities is entirely coincidental. Wynne Valentine asserts the moral right to be identified as the author of this work. Designations used by companies to distinguish their products are often claimed as trademarks. All brand names and product names used in this book and on its cover are trade names, service marks, trademarks, and registered trademarks of their respective owners. The publishers in the book are not associated with any product or vendor mentioned in this book. None of the companies referenced within the book have endorsed the book. Book cover by Dana Sacco. Chapter 1, The Demon Who Hated Christmas. Delany's ancient Subaru groaned in protest as it crawled up the final steep bend, the oversized Christmas tree strapped to its roof making the vehicle look like a determined but struggling turtle. The car's suspension dipped dramatically with each bump, accompanied by the musical tinkling of what had to be several hundred ornaments packed into every available space. "Come on, Betty," she coaxed her car, patting the weathered dashboard. "Just a little further. Think festive thoughts." The winter twilight cast long shadows through the snow-laden pines when Shadowpine Hall finally emerged from the misty darkness. Delany's breath caught in her throat. The Gothic manor loomed before her, its stone facade rising like a mountain of sharp angles and frost-kissed gargoyles. Somehow, it managed to look both magnificent and deeply annoyed at having to exist in the modern world. The car's tires crunched to a halt on the frozen gravel, the sound echoing across the empty grounds like nature's own announcement system. In the sudden silence, Delany could hear the building settling, or possibly judging her arrival. A crow took flight from one of the frost-dusted gargoyles, its wings beating a hasty retreat against the pewter sky. "Well," she announced to no one in particular, "this place definitely needs some holiday spirit." She threw open her car door and emerged into the biting winter air, her emerald green peacoat and rainbow-striped scarf creating a splash of color against the monochromatic landscape. A cherry-red pom-pom bobbed atop her knit hat as she surveyed her new workplace. The wind caught her auburn hair, sending strands dancing around her face like flickering flames against the manor's gloomy backdrop. Turning to the car, she opened the back door and carefully extracted the first box of decorations. The cardboard strained at the edges, packed full of carefully wrapped ornaments that clinked together like tiny bells. "Careful," she muttered, adjusting her grip. "The vintage ones are irreplaceable." Her grandmother's prized glass snowflakes were nestled somewhere in that precarious stack, wrapped in decades-old newspaper. Delany made her way up the cracked cobblestone path, her boots leaving fresh prints in the dusting of snow. The front door loomed before her, dominated by an elaborate knocker shaped like some kind of mythological beast. Its brass eyes seemed to follow her movement, catching what little remaining daylight there was in an unsettling gleam. "Aren't you fascinating?" She leaned closer to examine the intricate metalwork. "You look like you could use a festive ribbon." The metal felt strangely warm beneath her approaching fingers, despite the frigid air. Before her fingers could touch the knocker, the massive iron door swung inward with a creak that would have made any horror movie director weep with joy. The sound reverberated through the entrance hall like a ghostly pipe organ, stirring dust motes that danced in the weak light filtering through cobwebbed windows. And there, filling the doorframe with his imposing presence, stood her new employer. The dim interior lighting cast dramatic shadows across sharp cheekbones and darker shadows around the curved horns that swept back from his temples. His red eyes gleamed like embers in the gathering dusk, focusing on her with laser intensity. The collar of his dark coat stood high against his neck, as if attempting to shield him from both the cold and unwanted social interaction. "You're late." His voice carried the weight of centuries and just a hint of sulfur, rolling through the air like distant thunder. Delany's smile brightened. "Actually, I'm right on time. The email said 4 o'clock and it's—" She awkwardly shifted the box to check her watch, nearly losing her grip on the precious cargo. 4 on the dot, though I would have been here 10 minutes early if Betty hadn't needed a pep talk on that last hill. She ducked under his arm and strode into the foyer, the ornaments in her box creating a cheerful, jingling counterpoint to her boots on the marble floor, each step sending echoes dancing through the cavernous space. "This is perfect! The ceiling height in here is even better than I imagined. We can definitely fit a 12-foot tree in that corner, and those window alcoves are just begging for garland and— oh, is that an original Victorian chandelier?" Her voice echoed upward into the shadows gathering in the vaulted ceiling, where cobwebs swayed gently in a draft that seemed to come from nowhere. Asher remained frozen in the doorway, one hand still gripping the edge of the door hard enough to leave impressions in the ancient wood. His expression shifted from irritation to something approaching bewilderment as he watched this walking candy cane of a woman invade his space, trailing the scent of peppermint and pine needles in her wake. The muscles in his jaw worked silently, as if his century-old intimidation tactics had suddenly short-circuited. A muscle twitched near his left horn, making the shadows around him flicker. "You can't just—" he started, a hint of smoke curling from his nostrils. "Could you grab some more boxes from the car?" Delany interrupted, already setting up a command center on an ancient side table, brushing away decades of dust with her mittened hand. "I've got the whole car packed, and this transformation needs to happen quickly if we want to be ready for the holiday tours. The Historical Society was very specific about the timeline." She pulled out a tablet and began scrolling through what appeared to be a detailed spreadsheet, the blue light illuminating her determined expression. "I'm thinking we start with the entry and main hall today. Really set the tone for the whole experience. Though we should probably rescue that tree from the roof rack before it freezes solid." "There will be no—" Asher's voice carried a growl that could have curdled milk and sent small animals running for cover. "And I brought hot chocolate." Delany produced a thermos from somewhere in her coat with the flourish of a magician. "With tiny marshmallows. Everything goes better with tiny marshmallows, don't you think? Even grumpy demon lords need sugar sometimes." She unscrewed the cap, releasing a cloud of steam that smelled like pure Christmas joy. The aforementioned grumpy demon lord stared at her as if she'd started speaking in tongues, his red eyes widening slightly. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again, revealing the briefest flash of sharp teeth. A small muscle twitched near his left horn, and somewhere in the depths of the manor, a door slammed shut of its own accord. "I don't drink hot chocolate," he managed finally, the words seeming to pain him as much as the cheerful holiday music she'd started humming under her breath. "More for me, then." Delany was already heading back toward the door, somehow managing to slip past him despite the narrow space, her scarf brushing against his coat. "But you're still helping with the boxes. Consider it your cardio for the day. Being cursed is no excuse for missing arm day." She punctuated this with a playful wink that seemed to physically startle him. The winter wind swirled a few snowflakes through the open door, and they danced around Asher's still stunned form like nature's own confetti. His red eyes tracked Delany's movement as she bounded down the steps, her pom-pom bobbing with each step. "This is not," he muttered to himself, "how this was supposed to go." Chapter 2. Deck the halls with glitter bombs. Delany swept into the grand hall like a one-woman holiday parade, her footsteps echoing off the vaulted ceiling. The cavernous space stretched before her, all shadowy corners and Gothic grandeur begging to be brightened. Her eyes sparkled as she mentally mapped out tinsel trajectories and optimal ornament placement. "This," she declared, spinning in place with her arms outstretched, her boots making soft, scuffing sounds against the aged floor, "is exactly what I pictured. Look at those rafters. perfect for hanging icicle lights. And that alcove is just crying out for a themed display. I'm thinking Winter Wonderland meets Victorian Christmas. Maybe some vintage ornaments, crystal snowflakes catching the light. Asher loomed in the doorway, his expression suggesting he'd rather face an exorcism than witness what was about to unfold. The shadows seemed to curl around him protectively, as if sharing his distaste for the impending festivities. The hall is perfectly adequate as it is. Adequate? Delany pulled a string of white lights from one of her boxes, the plastic-wrapped cord crackling with promise. This place has more potential than a Hallmark movie marathon. Now, make yourself useful and hold this end. Trust me, you'll thank me later. Before he could protest, she'd thrust the lights into his hands and was already halfway up the grand staircase, her footsteps quick and determined. The string of bulbs cascaded behind her like a glowing trail as she wove them through the ornate banister, humming a Christmas carol under her breath. "These carvings are incredible," she mused, tracing a finger along the intricate wooden designs, feeling the smooth patches worn by centuries of hands. "Dragons?" "Hellhounds," Asher corrected flatly, still holding his end of the lights as if they might bite, his red eyes glowing with barely contained irritation. "And they're meant to be intimidating, not twinkling." "Well, they're about to be fabulous." Delany continued her decorating assault, each section of railing gradually transforming under her determined hands. Warm light began chasing away the shadows, revealing detailed woodwork that hadn't gleamed this brightly in decades. The carved hellhounds seemed to come alive in the dancing illumination, their fearsome faces softened by the gentle glow. Asher stalked behind her, his tall figure casting dramatic shadows that seemed to dance along the walls, his coat sweeping behind him like dark wings. "That section is crooked." "It's artistically asymmetrical," she sang back, adjusting a loop with practiced fingers. "The spacing is inconsistent." "It's whimsically varied," she countered, stepping back to admire her work. "You've missed a spot." "I'm creating depth through strategic negative space." She had an answer for everything, delivered with such cheerful confidence that Asher's scowl deepened with each exchange. His arms crossed tighter across his chest as she worked, looking like a disapproving Gothic statue come to life, complete with slightly twitching horns that betrayed his growing exasperation. "And now," Delany announced, reaching into another box with theatrical flair, her eyes sparkling with barely contained excitement, "for the pièce de résistance." She pulled out what appeared to be the world's largest Christmas stocking, its plush red fabric adorned with golden snowflakes and enough sparkly trim to be visible from space. The velvet material caught the light, sending tiny sparkles dancing across the shadowy walls. Asher's eyes widened in horror, his horns actually twitching backward. "You cannot be serious." "Oh, but I am." She pranced to the massive fireplace, the stocking trailing behind her like a festive cape, its golden tassels swishing against the ancient stone floor. With a flourish worthy of a magician's grand finale, she secured it to the ancient mantelpiece, adjusting the hanging loop until it draped just so. "Look how perfectly it fits. It's like this fireplace was built for it." "That fireplace was built in 1786 to ward off evil spirits," Asher growled, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Not to house your oversized sock." "Well, now it can do both. Multitasking is very in right now." Delany was already wheeling something else through the doorway. Something large, white, and inflatable that made an ominous squeaking sound against the wooden floors. "Speaking of multitasking, meet your new best friend!" The snowman began to take shape as she plugged it in, its round face expanding into an expression of permanent joy that seemed specifically designed to mock Asher's growing disgust. A little motor whirred to life, making the snowman's mitten-covered hand wave in an endless greeting, the mechanical sound echoing through the hall like a tiny, persistent ghost. "Absolutely not!" Asher's voice dropped to a dangerous octave, red eyes flashing like embers in a dying fire. The words had barely left his mouth when a strange tingling filled the air, like static electricity before a storm. Delany looked up as the first snowflake drifted down from the vaulted ceiling, followed by another and another, each one catching the light like tiny diamonds. Soon, a gentle indoor snowfall was transforming the hall into a winter wonderland, dusting every surface with a layer of pristine white. "Did you do that?" she asked, delighted, her cheeks flushed with wonder. "No," he muttered, brushing snow from his shoulders with sharp, irritated movements. "The house responds sometimes to strong emotions." As if on cue, a flash of crimson streaked through the air. The enchanted cardinals had arrived, swooping through the hall in perfect formation, their feathers gleaming like rubies against the falling snow. Their wing beats stirred the falling snow into miniature whirlwinds as they launched into an impeccable rendition of Deck the Halls, their crystalline voices filling every corner of the space. Delany spun in place, arms outstretched and face tilted up to catch the snowflakes, her auburn hair collecting tiny white stars. Her laughter echoed off the walls, harmonizing with the birds caroling, pure joy radiating from her like warmth from a hearth. "This is amazing! Your house has backup singers!" Asher's jaw clenched as he watched the scene unfold, looking like he might spontaneously combust at any moment. He retreated to his favorite armchair in the corner, only to leap up immediately with an undignified yelp. The entire seat cushion had been covered in silver and gold decorative pillows, complete with jingle bells and, worst of all, glitter. "What?" he snarled, attempting to brush the sparkling menace from his dark cloak. "Have you done to my chair?" Each swipe of his hand only seemed to spread the glitter further, transforming his normally imposing presence into something resembling a disgruntled disco ball. The cardinals, clearly enjoying his predicament, adjusted their song to include some improvised fa-la-las. Delany approached him, biting her lip to contain her growing smile. "You know what they say about glitter? It's the herpes of craft supplies. Once it's there forever." Their eyes met, his flashing with demonic annoyance while hers danced with triumph. A particularly bold cardinal swooped low enough to drop a small ornament into Asher's hair. "I believe," he said with deadly calm, still sparkling magnificently, "we need to discuss some boundaries." "Of course," Delany chirped, "right after we finish the garland, and the wreaths, and maybe just one more snowman for symmetry." The house responded with another gentle shower of snow, and somewhere in the distance, sleigh bells began to chime. Chapter 3: How to Train Your Holiday Demon. The 12-foot artificial Christmas tree loomed before them like a green giant waiting to be tamed. Boxes of ornaments created a festive minefield around its base, and several strings of lights lay in serpentine tangles across the floor. Delany surveyed the scene with the calculating eye of a general planning battle strategy, while Asher stood beside her looking like he'd rather face an actual army. "First rule of tree decorating," Delany announced, scooping up a string of white lights with the determination of someone about to perform delicate surgery, "is that the lights go on before anything else." She stretched up on her tiptoes to reach the top section, her festive holiday sweater, adorned with prancing reindeer and twinkling sequins, riding up slightly. "My mom used to say a Christmas tree without lights is just a really expensive coat rack, and believe me, we learned that lesson the hard way one year." "Fascinating," Asher deadpanned, but he found himself tracking her movements as she began methodically wrapping the strand around the uppermost branches, her fingers dancing through the artificial needles with practiced grace. "You can't just drape them on the outside," she explained, demonstrating by pushing the lights deeper into the artificial foliage with the precision of an artist. "See how I'm weaving them in and out? It creates depth. When we're done, it'll look like the tree is glowing from within, like magic. The normal kind, not the demon-summoning variety," she added with a playful wink. Her technique was surprisingly precise for someone who'd spent the morning causing chaos with inflatable snowmen. Each section received the same careful attention, the lights disappearing into the branches only to peek out at carefully planned intervals, creating a constellation of tiny stars within the green expanse. "Every year, my family would pile into our ancient station wagon to hunt for the perfect tree," she continued, working her way down with methodical focus. Dad would bring his special measuring tape, but he always underestimated the ceiling height. One year, we had to cut 2 feet off the bottom just to get it through the door. Mom never let him live that down. She called him the lumberjack all through New Year's. As she worked, Asher found himself drawn into the process despite his initial reluctance. He picked up an ornament, a delicate glass sphere in deep burgundy that reminded him of autumn sunsets, and turned it in his hands, watching it catch the light like a captured star. Without really meaning to, he stepped forward and hung it on a branch, his movements unexpectedly gentle. "That's perfect!" Delany beamed, her green eyes sparkling with genuine delight. "You have an eye for this!" She gestured enthusiastically with the string of lights, nearly sending a box of vintage ornaments tumbling. "Oops! Sorry. Anyway, there was this one time when my brother thought he saw Bigfoot while we were tree hunting. Turned out to be Mrs. Henderson from next door in her fur coat. But he wouldn't go near the tree farm for 3 years after that. He'd hide under his bed every time we mentioned Douglas firs." Her laughter was infectious, warming the usually chilly air of the manor like sunshine breaking through winter clouds. Even the enchanted cardinals, now perched along the banister in a perfectly spaced row, seemed to be enjoying her stories, adding soft chirps of accompaniment that somehow managed to sound like the opening notes of Deck the Halls. "My father," Asher began, then paused, surprised by his own willingness to share. His red eyes dimmed slightly, their usual fierce glow softening to the warm ember-like glow of memory. "He used to take me to the winter solstice celebrations. Before everything changed, we would light candles in the darkness and wait for dawn, watching the stars wheel overhead until the sun painted the world gold again." The vulnerability in his voice made Delany stop mid-rap, the silver ribbon dangling forgotten from her fingers. She turned to look at him, her usual sparkle replaced by something deeper, more understanding. The firelight caught the softness in her expression as she said quietly, "That sounds beautiful." Their eyes met across the half-decorated tree, pine needles glistening between them in the warm glow of the scattered lights. And for a moment, the space between them felt charged with something neither quite understood. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Then came the sharp crack of breaking glass, followed by Delany's quick intake of breath. "Ow!" She pulled her hand back from a damaged ornament, a delicate vintage bauble now scattered in glittering shards, blood welling from a cut across her index finger. Asher moved without thinking, crossing the space between them in 2 long strides, his coat swirling around his legs. He caught her injured hand in both of his touch surprisingly gentle for someone who'd spent the morning growling about glitter and threatening to exile tinsel from the premises. A soft golden light emanated from his palms, warming her skin like sunshine on a winter morning. "Oh," Delany breathed, watching in fascination as the light pulsed gently around her finger, creating dancing shadows on their joined hands. The cut began to close, leaving nothing but a faint warmth where the injury had been, like the lingering heat from a cup of cocoa. They stood frozen in that position, her small hand cradled in his larger ones, the golden light fading but neither moving to break contact. The tree lights twinkled behind them, casting alternating shadows across their still forms. Delany flexed her healed finger experimentally, and Asher could feel the movement against his palm, delicate as a butterfly's wing. "That's quite a party trick," she said finally, her voice slightly breathless, a hint of wonder threading through her words. Asher dropped her hand as if suddenly remembering himself, his shoulders tensing. "It's nothing," he muttered, taking a step back and shoving his hands deep into his pockets. "Just a minor healing ability, hardly worth mentioning." But his expression had lost its sharp edges, and his eyes lingered on her hand for a moment longer than necessary, tracking the movement of her newly healed finger. "Well, I think it's amazing," Delany declared, returning to the lights with renewed enthusiasm, her cheeks slightly flushed. "And very festive. Gold is definitely a Christmas color." The Cardinals chose that moment to launch into Silent Night, their sweet voices filling the brief silence that followed, the harmonies floating through the air like snowflakes. Asher found himself reaching for another ornament, this time a crystal snowflake that scattered rainbow prisms across the walls in a mesmerizing dance of light. "The lights go deeper into the branches," he said gruffly, adjusting the placement of his snowflake with unexpected care. "For depth, it creates better shadows when viewed from different angles." Delany's smile could have powered all the Christmas lights in the manor, maybe even the entire town of Pine Grove. "Now you're getting it!" she exclaimed, practically bouncing on her toes with excitement. Together they continued decorating, their movements falling into an unexpected rhythm, like dancers who'd somehow stumbled into perfect synchronization. Delany wove lights and shared stories about her favorite holiday memories, while Asher placed ornaments with precise care, occasionally offering quiet comments about proper weight distribution and light reflection that somehow made her laugh. The tree slowly transformed before them, each new addition making it sparkle more brilliantly, and if anyone noticed that Asher's scowl had softened to something almost resembling contentment, or that his red eyes had taken on a warmer glow, nobody mentioned it. The Cardinals, however, did switch to a particularly romantic arrangement of "The First Noel," complete with harmonized trills and dramatic swooping formations around the tree's upper branches. Asher shot them a warning glare, his jaw tightening ever so slightly. But they just fluffed their feathers and carried on, apparently immune to demonic intimidation when Christmas carols were involved. One particularly bold bird even winked at him before launching into an elaborate descant. Chapter 4: Cardinals, Curses, and Christmas Chaos. As evening settled over Shadowpine Hall, Delany and Asher found themselves seated in high-backed leather chairs before the grand fireplace. The flames cast dancing shadows across their faces, creating an intimate atmosphere in the vast space. Delany had managed to transform the room into a perfect blend of festive warmth and Gothic charm, garlands draped elegantly over dark wood panels, while vintage ornaments caught the firelight from strategic perches. "So," Delany said, curling her legs underneath her in the oversized chair, "are you going to tell me about it? The curse?" She'd wrapped herself in a thick burgundy throw she'd discovered in one of the hall's many cupboards, looking completely at home despite the manor's imposing nature. The blanket's worn silk fringe brushed against her fingers as she settled deeper into its warmth. Asher's jaw tightened, his red eyes fixed on the dancing flames. For a long moment, he remained silent, fingers drumming against the worn leather armrests. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. The shadows seemed to deepen around him, as if responding to the heaviness of his memories. "It was different back then," he began, the words coming slowly. "Demons weren't all what humans imagine now. Some of us protected things, places, people." His lips twisted in a bitter smile. "I had a territory, a collection of villages under my watch. They left offerings in exchange for protection. Nothing dark, just harvest shares, handcrafted items." The fire crackled, sending sparks up the chimney as Asher's hands clenched the armrests. Vorik came in the dead of winter. He wanted to enslave the villagers, drain their life force for power. It was... He shook his head, a muscle working in his cheek. The humans stood no chance against him, but I did. Delany leaned forward, completely absorbed. The firelight played across her features, highlighting the intensity of her focus. Her fingers clutched the blanket tighter, unconsciously drawing it around her shoulders like armor. "I drove him back," Asher continued, his voice taking on a growl. "Humiliated him in front of his followers, but Vorik..." The fire flickered dramatically, as if responding to the tension in his words. A log shifted, sending up a shower of orange sparks. "He's always been creative with his revenge, always known exactly where to strike to make it hurt the most." "The curse," Delany whispered, her voice barely audible above the crackling fire. Asher's red eyes reflected the flames as he nodded, the glow making them seem even more otherworldly than usual. "He tied my fate to Christmas, the season of joy, light, and human connection. Everything I'd protected but never truly understood myself." He gestured around them at the magical holiday chaos, the ever-present dusting of snow in the corners, the tinsel that seemed to multiply when no one was looking, the wreaths that insisted on hanging themselves at odd angles. I'm bound to Shadowpine during the holiday season. If I lose my temper, show any real anger. He trailed off, jaw clenching, his fingers curling into tight fists at his sides. The curse resets, Delany finished, putting the pieces together, her heart sinking at the implications. Another year of solitude, another Christmas alone. Asher's voice carried the weight of countless failed attempts, each word heavy with centuries of disappointment. The curse has a particularly twisted sense of humor. The more it irritates me, the more likely I am to fail. It's like living with a mischievous child who knows exactly which buttons to push. But there's a way to break it, isn't there? Delany shifted to the edge of her seat, her characteristic optimism beginning to shine through despite the gravity of his words. There's always a way. Every curse has its loophole. Asher raised an eyebrow, centuries of skepticism evident in the gesture as he studied her eager expression. Technically, yes. I need to make it through the season without losing my temper, and... He hesitated, looking uncomfortable, his shoulders tensing beneath his dark coat. Someone has to choose to stay, of their own free will. That's it? Delany's face lit up with excitement, her green eyes sparkling in the firelight. Well, that doesn't sound so impossible. A group of enchanted cardinals chose that moment to flutter down to the mantelpiece, arranging themselves like an attentive audience. Their crimson feathers gleamed as one of them tilted its head, letting out a curious chirp that seemed almost amused. You have no idea what you're saying, Asher said, shaking his head with grim resignation. The curse fights back. It creates chaos, pushes buttons, finds ways to make everything more difficult. He gestured at the cardinals, who responded by breaking into a few bars of "We wish you a Merry Christmas" before falling silent again, their tiny heads bobbing in perfect synchronization. Delany stood up, striking a pose with her hands on her hips, the burgundy throw now draped around her shoulders like a cape, its tassels swaying with her movement. Then it's a good thing you've got me now. I happen to be an expert in holiday chaos. She grinned, spinning in place with theatrical flair, the throw billowing out behind her. And I love a challenge. Asher watched her with a mixture of amusement and disbelief, shaking his head at her unwavering confidence. His red eyes flickered briefly with something that might have been hope before he quickly masked it. You're either very brave or very foolish, he said, but there was a warmth in his voice that hadn't been there before. I prefer holiday optimist, Delany replied, executing a little curtsy that made the cardinals trill in appreciation, their wings fluttering like tiny crimson fans. Besides, you've already proved you're not as scary as you pretend to be. I saw how you handled those ornaments earlier. Very gentle for a supposedly terrifying demon. I was merely preventing you from breaking more of them, Asher grumbled, tugging at his coat sleeve as if to straighten an invisible wrinkle, but his lips twitched slightly at the corners. Uh-huh. Delany flopped back into her chair, this time sideways with her legs draped over one arm, making herself completely at home in the ancient piece of furniture. Face it, you're stuck with me now. We're going to deck these halls properly, and you're going to learn to love Christmas whether you like it or not. The cardinals burst into an enthusiastic rendition of Deck the Halls, complete with elaborate trills on the fa-la-la-la-las, bobbing and weaving through the air like tiny conductors. Asher pinched the bridge of his nose, his shoulders tensing before deliberately relaxing, but Delany could have sworn she saw the ghost of a smile cross his face. The curse doesn't stand a chance, she declared, reaching over to pat his arm, feeling the surprising warmth beneath his dark coat. Trust me, I once organized a complete Christmas festival in 6 hours when all the decorations got accidentally shipped to Saskatchewan. This is going to be fun. Her green eyes sparkled with determination and mischief, daring him to disagree. Asher looked at her hand on his arm, then back at her face, his expression unreadable in the firelight. The warmth of her touch seemed to linger even through the thick fabric of his coat, an unfamiliar sensation that made him want to both lean in and pull away. The cardinals held their collective breath, their little feathered heads swiveling between the two like spectators at a tennis match, a few of them clutching tiny sprigs of holly in their beaks as if ready to celebrate at a moment's notice. Fun, he repeated, as if testing out an unfamiliar word, rolling it around his tongue like a foreign delicacy. That's what you think this is going to be? Absolutely, Delany said with complete conviction, the firelight dancing in her eyes and casting a warm glow across her determined features. And do you know why? I'm afraid to ask, he drawled, though the corner of his mouth twitched ever so slightly. Because, she said, settling deeper into her chair with a satisfied smile, tucking her feet beneath her and looking entirely too pleased with herself. You already care enough to worry about breaking my ornaments. That's called progress, my festively challenged friend. She punctuated her declaration with a knowing tap of her finger against the armrest, as if she'd just solved a particularly complex puzzle. Chapter 5: Mistletoe Traps and Demonic Drama. A flash of dark energy rippled through the grand hall, causing the Christmas lights to sputter and dim. Vorik materialized between two towering nutcrackers, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the festive chaos surrounding him. His lip curled as he took in the transformed space. My, how quaint. His voice dripped with disdain as he plucked a strand of tinsel from his shoulder, examining it between manicured fingers before letting it flutter to the ground with theatrical distaste. Really, Asher? Letting a human turn your prison into this garish display? I expected better taste, even from you. The temperature plummeted, frost creeping across the windows in delicate, deadly patterns as Vorik's dark aura spread through the room like spilled ink. The enchanted cardinals huddled together on their perch, their cheerful songs reduced to nervous chirps, their crimson feathers puffing up against the supernatural chill. Get out! Asher growled, his hands clenching into fists at his sides, wisps of darkness curling around his knuckles. Vorik circled him with predatory grace, orange eyes gleaming like hot coals in the dimming light. Now, is that any way to greet an old friend? Especially during this... He gestured at a gingerbread village display, flicking one of the tiny lampposts with his finger. Season of giving? Friend? Asher's eyes flared crimson, the color bleeding into the air around him. You cursed me. And you've done such interesting things with it. Vorik completed another circle, his shoes clicking against the floor in a rhythm that seemed deliberately calculated to grate on Asher's nerves. Though I must say, this year's attempt at breaking free is particularly amusing. A decorator? He cast a dismissive glance at Delany, looking down his nose as if she were something unpleasant stuck to his Italian leather shoes. How desperate you must be. Actually, Delany piped up, stepping between them in her reindeer sweater complete with light-up nose, which blinked cheerfully in defiance of the tense atmosphere. I'm a holiday optimization specialist. Vorik paused mid-stride, thrown off by her cheerful interruption, his perfectly composed expression faltering. A what? You heard me. She planted her hands on her hips, somehow making the jingling bells on her bracelet sound defiant, the tiny chimes echoing through the frozen air. And you're kind of ruining the ambiance we've got going here. Do you have any idea how long it took to get the lighting just right? Asher moved to pull her back, but Delany was already in motion, backing away from both demons with an exaggerated show of fear that seemed just a touch too theatrical, her reindeer sweater's blinking nose somehow managing to match her overacted performance. Oh no, she gasped, retreating toward the archway, pressing one hand to her forehead like a swooning damsel in an old movie. Please don't hurt me, you big scary demon. I'm just a helpless holiday decorator. Vorik's smile turned predatory as he followed her, unable to resist such obvious prey, his polished shoes clicking against the floor with calculated menace. Well, at least you know your place, little human. His orange eyes gleamed with cruel satisfaction. Right under the mistletoe? Delany's fear vanished, replaced by a triumphant grin as she pointed upward, the bells on her bracelet chiming in perfect harmony with her revelation. Vorik's eyes widened as the seemingly innocent sprig burst into brilliant golden light, its magic forming a shimmering dome around him that sparkled like freshly fallen snow. He snarled, pushing against the barrier with both hands, but remained trapped within its festive field, his expensive suit collecting magical glitter with each movement. "What is this?" he demanded, orange eyes blazing with indignant fury. The perfect part in his hair was starting to come undone. "Enchanted mistletoe," Delany explained, already reaching for the garlands she'd strategically placed earlier, her green eyes dancing with mischief. "Blessed by St. Nicholas himself! But wait, there's more!" She gave an enthusiastic wiggle that made her sweater's nose blink faster. She grabbed the garlands, which glowed with their own inner light like strings of captured stars, and spun them like a lasso above her head. The evergreen ropes seemed to move with a mind of their own, weaving through the air with graceful purpose before wrapping around Vorik's legs despite his attempts to dodge, the pine needles releasing a burst of festive scent. "This is ridiculous!" he spat, trying to maintain his dignity while hopping to keep his balance, his tailored pants now decorated with tinsel that seemed to multiply by the second. "You dare!" A snowball caught him square in the face, bursting in a shower of silver sparks that clung to his perfectly groomed eyebrows. Delany had already loaded up her arms with more of the glowing projectiles, each one packed with holiday magic that pulsed like tiny heartbeats against her festive sweater. The cardinals, watching from nearby branches, trilled the opening notes of Winter Wonderland in perfect harmony. "Oh, I dare," she said, launching another volley with practiced precision. Her eyes sparkled with mischief as she took aim. "And I've got great aim! 4 years of competitive snowball fighting in college. Team captain, actually, but who's counting?" Each impact made Vorik stumble backward, the holiday magic sizzling against his demonic aura in bright, crackling bursts. Frost crystals formed on his expensive suit jacket, spreading like delicate lace. "Enough!" he roared, but his voice held more confusion than menace, his usual smooth composure completely shattered. "This is beneath me! I am a lord of the... Oof!" "No," Asher said, stepping forward as crimson flames began to dance around his hands, casting dramatic shadows across his sharp features. "This is exactly what you deserve." The banishment spell built between his palms, feeding off his centuries of frustration, but tempered by something new, the warm, unfamiliar sensation of genuine amusement. Little sparks of joy mixed with his magic, turning the flames a deeper shade of red. As Delany's final snowball struck Vorik's chest with a satisfying thwack, Asher released the spell. Fire and holiday magic collided in a spectacular explosion of red and gold that lit up the entire hall. Vorik had time for one last outraged expression, his perfectly styled hair now a disaster of tinsel and frost, before he vanished, leaving behind only a faint scent of singed peppermint and a single, slightly smoking designer cufflink. Silence fell over the hall as magical residue settled around them like aurora borealis coming down to earth. Tinsel and snow drifted down like celebratory confetti, coating everything in a layer of sparkles that caught the light from the ancient chandeliers. One of the cardinals tentatively broke into the first few notes of "We Are the Champions," and its companions quickly joined in with harmonizing chirps. Asher turned to Delany, trying to maintain his stern demeanor despite the ridiculous amount of glitter now coating his dark coat. "That was reckless." "That was awesome," she corrected, brushing snow from her sweater with a triumphant grin. Her cheeks were flushed with excitement and victory. "And don't even try to pretend you're not impressed. I saw that smile when the first snowball hit him, right in his smug face, too." "I was not smiling," Asher insisted, even as his lips threatened to curve upward and his red eyes softened at the corners. "I was grimacing at your complete disregard for safety protocols when dealing with demon lords. There are rules about these things, you know." "Uh-huh." Delany reached up and plucked a piece of tinsel from his hair, twirling the shimmering strand between her fingers before letting it flutter to the floor. "Next time I'll be sure to consult the official demon lord safety manual. Oh, wait, I wrote my own. Rule 1. Enchanted mistletoe works every time. Rule 2. Always keep extra on hand for particularly stubborn cases. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the corridor grew utterly still. The Christmas lights steadied, casting a warm glow over them both, painting shadows and highlights across their faces. Even the perpetual shadows that clung to the corners of Shadowpine retreated, as if sensing the shift in atmosphere. Asher's attempt at a disapproving look crumbled entirely as Delany grinned up at him, her face flushed with victory and holiday spirit, green eyes sparkling with mischief. "You're impossible," he said, but the words carried no heat. His shoulders relaxed, tension melting away like snow in sunshine. "Thank you," she replied, beaming and giving a little mock curtsy. "Now help me hang up more mistletoe. Just in case your friend decides to come back for round 2, I'm thinking every doorway, window, and possibly that chandelier." The Cardinals burst into full song, their harmony filling the hall with triumphant music as Asher found himself, once again, unable to argue with her logic. They perched along the banister, their crimson feathers bright against the dark wood, conducting their impromptu chorus with tiny bobbing heads and fluttering wings. Chapter 6. Love. Actually, is breaking curses. The grand clock in Shadowpine Hall began to chime midnight, each resonant toll sending ripples of magic through the air. Delany felt it in her bones, 12 strikes that seemed to pause time itself, each one more powerful than the last. "Something's happening," she whispered, watching as golden light began seeping from the manor's darkest corners, threading through the air like ribbons of sunrise breaking through storm clouds. Asher stood transfixed, his red eyes wide as the transformation swept through his home. Shadows that had lingered for centuries retreated like morning mist, revealing the warm wood and rich textures beneath. Ancient tapestries brightened, their colors restored to their original vibrancy, and even the dust in the air seemed to sparkle with newfound magic. The curse's hold dissolved with each passing second, leaving behind an almost tangible warmth that reminded Delany of fresh-baked cookies and crackling hearths. "It's breaking," he breathed, wonder replacing his usual cynicism. "The curse, it's actually breaking." His hands trembled slightly at his sides, centuries of practiced stoicism crumbling like the shadows. The enchanted decorations responded to the surge of magic. Christmas lights blazed brighter, their glow reflecting off newly polished surfaces. Garlands shimmered with inner radiance, sending cascades of golden sparkles across the walls, and the massive tree in the grand hall sparkled as if touched by starlight. Each ornament seemed to dance with its own inner light, casting kaleidoscope patterns across the floor. Above them, the cardinals erupted into a symphony of joy, their voices carrying notes that no ordinary birds could achieve, weaving familiar carols into something altogether magical. Delany watched it all with a bittersweet smile, then quietly gathered her coat and gloves from the antique coat rack, which had somehow transformed from Gothic wrought iron into gleaming brass, its curves now elegant rather than foreboding. She moved toward the door with measured steps, each one slightly hesitant, as if her feet were refusing to cooperate with her decision to leave. "Well," she said, trying to keep her voice light despite the lump forming in her throat, "looks like my work here is done. You shouldn't have any trouble keeping the place cheerful now." Her fingers played nervously with the buttons of her coat, betraying her reluctance. "Wait." Asher's voice carried none of its usual gruffness. He crossed the space between them in 3 long strides, his coat billowing behind him, catching her hand just as she reached for the door handle. "Don't go." She turned back, surprised by the vulnerability in his expression. His usual masks of sarcasm and detachment had fallen away, leaving something raw and honest in their place. Even his crimson eyes, normally so fierce and guarded, held a warmth she'd never seen before. "The curse is broken," he said softly, his deep voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to stay." "That's not why I stayed in the first place," Delany replied, meeting his gaze with unwavering certainty. Her heart thundered in her chest, but her voice remained steady. Asher's fingers tightened around hers, his thumb tracing absent patterns against her skin. "You've changed everything," he confessed, glancing around at the transformed hall. The shadows that had once clung to every corner had retreated, replaced by twinkling lights and festive warmth. Not just the manor, though I have to admit, even the glitter has grown on me. You changed me, made me remember what it was like to... He paused, struggling with the words, his jaw working as if they physically pained him. To feel warm. Above them, the mistletoe began to glow with a soft, silvery light, its leaves unfurling like delicate lace. Neither of them had hung it there. The manor itself seemed to be playing matchmaker, the old stones humming with anticipation. "I suppose I did promise to bring some light into your life," Delany said, stepping closer until she could feel the heat radiating from his tall frame. "Though I didn't expect quite such literal results." "Stay," Asher repeated, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek, fingers threading into her auburn hair. "Not because of a curse or holiday obligations or... or because you're secretly a big softy under all that brooding." Her eyes sparkled with mischief. His lips twitched, fighting a smile that was becoming less rare with each passing day. "Don't push it." "Too late," Delany whispered, and rose up on her toes to kiss him, her hands sliding up his chest to curl around his collar. The moment their lips met, snowflakes began drifting past the windows, catching the golden light from within. Magic swirled around them like a gentle breeze, carrying the scent of pine and cinnamon, wrapping them in its enchanted embrace. The cardinals trilled a perfect harmony from their perch on the grand staircase, their song weaving through the air like ribbon, a celebration of winter's magic and love's triumph over the darkest of curses. 1 year later, "A little to the left," Delany called out, directing a group of volunteers as they hung wreaths in the grand hall. "Perfect. Now we just need about 50 more bows, and this section will be ready for the open house." She clapped her hands together, her festive sweater sparkling with tiny lights that she'd somehow managed to weave into the fabric. Shadowpine Hall hummed with activity, its spaces permanently warmed by magical light that seemed to radiate from the very walls. The transformation that had begun that Christmas Eve had only deepened over the year, turning the once forbidding manor into a stunning blend of Gothic grandeur and welcoming charm. Even the shadows seemed softer now, dancing playfully behind the twinkling fairy lights that adorned every archway. Local townspeople filled the halls, some hanging decorations while others simply wandered and admired. Children chased each other around the massive Christmas tree, their laughter echoing off the vaulted ceiling. The manor's doors stood wide open, welcoming anyone who wished to share in its warmth. The scent of cinnamon and pine wafted through the air, mingling with the aroma of hot chocolate being served in the conservatory. "I still can't believe this is the same place," Mrs. Henderson from the bakery remarked, running her hand along a garland-wrapped banister. "We used to tell stories about the demon who lived here." She shook her head in wonder as a shower of golden sparkles drifted down from where her fingers had touched the greenery. "Oh, he still does," Delany said with a wink. "He's just more partial to tinsel these days." She gestured toward the great hall with the candy cane she'd been using as a pointing stick. Across the room, Asher stood atop a ladder, attempting to maintain his intimidating demeanor while hanging crystal snowflakes from the chandelier. He failed spectacularly, especially when one of the permanent resident cardinals landed on his horn and began warbling, "Deck the halls." His dark coat was dusted with glitter that seemed to multiply no matter how many times he brushed it off. "Shoo!" he growled, but there was no heat in it. The bird merely tilted its head and switched to silent night, swaying in perfect time to the melody. More cardinals had joined the original flock over the year, making their homes in the manor's rafters. They seemed to take particular delight in breaking into impromptu duets with guests, often leading to spontaneous carol sessions that could last for hours. Their crimson feathers caught the light as they swooped between the ancient beams, leaving trails of sparkles in their wake that dissolved into tiny snowflakes before reaching the ground. Delany caught Asher's eye across the room and couldn't help but smile. He tried to scowl back, but the effect was ruined by the tinsel in his hair and the contentment that radiated from him like a physical force. Their private look spoke volumes about how far they'd come, from cursed demon and determined decorator to something neither of them had expected to find in the enchanted halls of Shadowpine. "Your demon's looking awfully festive," Sarah from the flower shop teased, nudging Delany with her elbow as she adjusted a nearby wreath. "Those sparkles in his hair are particularly becoming." "Don't let him hear you say that," Delany laughed, watching as another strand of tinsel materialized in his dark locks. "He's still trying to convince everyone he's terrifying." As if on cue, a child's ball rolled near Asher's ladder. He picked it up with exaggerated menace, his red eyes glowing just enough to be theatrical, made it float with a curl of magic, then sent it gently back to its owner. The little girl giggled and waved, completely unintimidated by the supposedly fearsome lord of the manor. "Terrifying," Delany agreed solemnly, trying not to laugh as Asher pretended not to notice the growing collection of cardinals gathering above his head, all of them warming up for what promised to be an enthusiastic rendition of Joy to the World. One particularly bold bird was already conducting the others with its wing, and the familiar sparkles of their magic were beginning to drift down like holiday snow. "All right, have you ever just needed something fun to read on a day where you are just sitting around?" "Yep, that was today. I decided to start writing some super quick fun holiday reads that are just there to make you smile, so I really hope you enjoy them. Remember to subscribe to my channel. I love providing you with some of my fun stories, and when you click subscribe, it can help me continue doing this." When